16 years of our present incarnation. But we are only beginners, for you Holy Ones know how star high, how ocean wide and how desert long is that path. Indeed it is to be instructed as to the right way of walking therein that we have been miraculously directed by a dream to seek you out, as the most pious, the most saintly and the most learned of all the Lamas in these parts." "Yes, certainly we are that," answered the Abbot Kou en, "seeing that there is no other monastery within 5 months' journey," and again he chuckled, "though alas," he added with a pathetic little sigh, "our numbers grow few." After this we asked leave to retire to our chambers in order to rest, and there, upon very good imitations of beds, we slept solidly for 24 hours, rising at last perfectly refreshed and well. Such was our introduction to the Monastery of the Mountains, for it had no other name, where we were destined to spend the next 6 months of our lives. Within a few days, for they were not long in giving us their complete confidence, those good-hearted and simple old monks told us all their history. It seemed that of old time there was a Lamasery here, in which dwelt several hundred brethren. This indeed was obviously true, for the place was enormous, although for the most part ruined, and, as the weather-worn statue of Buddha showed, very ancient. The story ran, according to the old abbot, that 2 centuries or so before, the monks had been killed out by some fierce tribe who lived beyond the desert and across the distant mountains, which tribe were heretics and worshippers of fire. Only a few of them escaped to bring the sad news to other communities, and for 5 generations no attempt was made to reoccupy the place. At length it was revealed to him, our friend Kou en, when a young man, that he was a reincarnation of one of the old monks of this monastery, who also was named Kou en, and that it was his duty during his present life to return thither, as by so doing he would win much merit and receive many wonderful revelations. So he gathered a band of zealots and, with the blessing and consent of his superiors, they started out, and after many hardships and losses found and took possession of the place, repairing it sufficiently for their needs. This happened about 50 years before, and here they had dwelt ever since, only communicating occasionally with the outside world. At first their numbers were recruited from time to time by new brethren, but at length these ceased to come, with the result that the community was dying out. "And what then?" I asked. "And then," the abbot answered, "nothing. We have acquired much merit, we have been blessed with many revelations, and after the repose we have earned in Devachan, our lots in future existences will be easier. What more can we ask or desire, removed as we are from all the temptations of the world?" For the rest, in the intervals of their endless prayers and still more endless contemplations, they were husbandmen, cultivating the soil, which was fertile at the foot of the mountain, and tending their herd of yaks. Thus they wore away their blameless lives until at last they died of old age, and, as they believed, and who shall say they were wrong, the eternal round repeated itself elsewhere. Immediately after, indeed on the very day of our arrival at the monastery, the winter began in earnest with bitter cold and snowstorms, so heavy and frequent that all the desert was covered deep. Very soon it became obvious to us that there we must stay until the spring, since to attempt to move in any direction would be to perish. With some misgivings we explained this to the Abbot Kou en, offering to remove to one of the empty rooms in the ruined part of the building, supporting ourselves with fish that we could catch by cutting a hole in the ice of the lake above the monastery, and, if we were able to find any, on game which we might trap or shoot in the scrub-like forest of stunted pines and junipers that grew around its border. But he would listen to no such thing. We had been sent to be their guests, he said, and their guests we should remain for so long as might be convenient to us. Would we lay upon them the burden of the sin of inhospitality? Besides, he remarked with his chuckle, we who dwell alone like to hear about that other great monastery called the World, where the monks are not so favoured as we who are set in this blessed situation, and where folk even go hungry in body and," he added, "in soul." Indeed, as we soon found out, the dear old man's object was to keep our feet in the path until we reached the goal of truth, or, in other words, became excellent Lamas like himself and his flock. So we walked in the path, as we had done in many other Lamasery, and assisted in the long prayers in the ruined temple, and studied the Conjur, or translation of the words of Buddha, which is their Bible and a very long one, and generally showed that our minds were open. Also we expounded to them the doctrines of our own faith, and greatly delighted were they to find so many points of similarity between it and theirs. Indeed, I am not certain but that if we could have stopped there long enough, say 10 years, we might have persuaded some of them to accept a new revelation of which we were the prophets. Further, in spare hours we told them many tales of the monastery called the World, and it was really delightful and in a sense piteous to see the joy with which they listened to these stories of wondrous countries and new races of men, they who knew only of Russia and China and some semi-savage tribes, inhabitants of the mountains and the deserts. "It is right for us to learn all this," they declared, "for who knows, perhaps in future incarnations we may become inhabitants of these places." But though the time passed thus in comfort and indeed, compared to many of our experiences, in luxury, oh! our hearts were hungry, for in them burned the consuming fire of our quest. We felt that we were on the threshold, yes, we knew it, and yet our wretched physical limitations made it impossible for us to advance by a single step. On the desert beneath fell the snow. Moreover, great winds arose suddenly that drove those snows like dust, piling them in heaps as high as trees, beneath which any unfortunate traveller would be buried. Here we must wait, there was nothing else to be done. One elevation we found, and only one. In a ruined room of the monastery was a library of many volumes, placed there, doubtless by the monks who were massacred in times bygone. These had been more or less cared for and rearranged by their successors, who gave us liberty to examine them as often as we pleased. Truly it was a strange collection, and I should imagine of priceless value, for among them were to be found Buddhistic, Sivastic and Shamanistic writings that we had never before seen or heard of, together with the lives of a multitude of Bodhisattvas or distinguished saints, written in various tongues, some of which we did not understand. What proved more interesting to us, however, was a diary in many tomes that for generations had been kept by the Khubilghans or abbots of the old Lamasery, in which every event